in the US, when I started work with HIV, it was very much seen as a gay disease. It actually started out being called GRID, gay-related immune dysfunction, or a gay cancer. And I think because it was seen like that, there was no response from authorities. And then the next group that the infection was identified in was intravenous drug users, again, highly marginalized. And then it was women and children, and that's when the government actually sat up and said, yeah, we should do something. So at that time, I still remember, of course, one didn't know much about the disease itself. We didn't know how it actually spread. I remember initially the Department of Health calling us in for training and saying, you must talk about using 2 condoms. And then a month later, we were called back and said, no. 2 condoms are actually problematic because of slippage, so you must only talk about single condoms. So, and then of course we didn't know about mother's milk. There was a very firm belief that you cannot get infected from breast milk. So, so there were many ups and downs, and at that time I remember hospitals would not treat people with HIV. There was a lot of discrimination. People were dying left, right and center. I mean, I've lost count of how many friends I have lost to the disease during that period. This is pre-ARVs, pre-even the single dose AZT that was being used. Well, when I came back to India, this was in December '94, there wasn't much happening with HIV, and there was nothing happening with the gay community. And when I mean gay, I'm using the term across the board, right, for LGBT, including men having sex with men. There wasn't much happening. There was Humsafar Trust in Bombay, and having seen what I had seen in the previous nearly a decade, I just felt very strongly that this was something that one should learn lessons from that experience, and maybe we won't suffer the same fate if only we could reach out to the community, and because it's all about behavior change. It's nothing else. It's a very preventable disease, right? There's no reason for someone to get HIV. All they need to do was take precautions, which is easier said than done, of course. But I remember I actually decided to start work with the community because I felt I had so much experience in that area of work that I could transfer that experience. How to get the community to believe that I wasn't here to stop them from having sex, or stop them from having, or that I had come with this Western agenda, right? And I have my own hidden agendas for doing what I'm doing. That was a huge challenge. But then, like all challenges, I think if you take it head on, people see where you're coming from. It's not, and that's what I want to talk about, the fact that if you set your mind to do something, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do it. Yeah? So it took us a long time because I had to keep coming up with, first of all, I had to retrain myself, because I think the way we look at sexuality in our culture is really different from the Western understanding of, for example, even identities. It's really different. And I was very much trained in that Western mold. So for me, you're either straight or gay or bi, and suddenly I'm confronted with this whole thing where men are telling me that they are not even, just because they're penetrating, they're actually straight. So that's when I felt, our messaging has to kind of start looking at those issues. So yeah, the challenges were many, but not insurmountable like most challenges. I used the HIV angle to enter the LGBT arena. And I think for me it came from a very strong belief in equality and rights. And I just felt, because I'm not from the community, I had to really tread carefully. All I had was my very strong, which still exists, belief on how people should not be discriminated against. And that's where I came from at a personal level. And therefore the strategies actually included accessing the community through community members. I was lucky, I had a lot of gay friends, and they were the ones who actually pushed me into this, right? Then finding ways to convince the community that one had no hidden agendas, that I had nothing to gain or lose by doing what I was doing. I was lucky to get funding to do training on HIV/AIDS issues. In all of the training, we have a big component on homosexuality. So I've used every platform that I could to reach out to the community and at least get a debate going. Because I think unless we start talking about these issues, we're not going to get anywhere. It's critical. It's critical. At least my understanding was that if people don't value themselves, they're not going to protect themselves. And the one thing I did realize working with the community is there were no role models, there were no spaces. It used to break my heart when really young, I used to constantly meet really young boys in the park and from rural areas, and they would say, is there no medicine you can give me to make me stop feeling this way? And I can't think of anything more heartbreaking. And therefore, if you feel that way about yourself, why would you think of protecting yourself, right? So for me, it became increasingly clear that those spaces have to be created where people learn to value themselves. And therefore, the need to even change the law, challenge the law. When I came back, it made sense to set up. And it was interesting because at that time, Shivananda Khan was with NAS project in London, and he heard I was coming back to India and he asked me to set up. And I did, and then he didn't have the resources to fund. But by then I had already registered as NAS. So I started doing consultancies to get money into the organization to do the work. So even though we shared a similar name, there was no connect in terms of course, the philosophy and the thinking. And there was a divergent philosophy from his, in terms of he was only focused on men having sex with men. And I looked at the epidemic as being way beyond, because for me, it was all about most of these men were marrying women, and therefore the impact on the lives of women and children, I felt it was really important to start connecting at that level. And to start talking about these issues with women. Though of course, initially, I did go to women's groups who threw me out saying, it's not a women's issue. Whereas I had seen so many women who had gotten infected, and I knew it was just a matter of time before we started seeing that. But luckily, because of that training that we were able to do, we actually started training intermediary organizations to include HIV, who had a mandate to train, to include HIV prevention into their ongoing training activities. So I think that as a strategy worked very well for us. Because we were coming in from the HIV angle, I did manage to convince a lot of the police in the areas where we were doing outreach, because at that time I was doing the outreach and the counseling and all of that. I would go to the local thana and talk to them about what I was doing, and over a period of time, I think what helped was the fact that I was a woman and an older woman. That helped a lot. because they thought I was completely bad. I mean, they were like, Madam, aap apna haath kahan la rahe hain?" So I said, never mind that, but I'm here and this is what I'm doing. And it was interesting, because then the other thing that would happen is once we started having outreach workers from the community going in to do prevention activities, the cops, every second day I would get a phone call at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 12 o'clock at night, that they've put us inside the thana and they said we're promoting an illegal activity. And then I would go and get them out and talk to the SHO, and everything would be hunky-dory for a while. Then we systematically started doing training with the police. And it was interesting because I just walked into the South, in house class this was, into the DC's office, and I said, I'm so and so, and I believe you'll do training here, and can you give me an hour's slot to talk about HIV and homosexuality in section 377? And he said, take it. And that's how it started. And every Tuesday we had a training slot. And everyone in Delhi, all those beat constables, all the constables go through this training. So it was interesting. Every time someone would be caught giving condoms, and they'd say, "Hum Nas Foundation se hai," they say, "Acha, acha." So I think at many levels. One is how you work the system. The other is just being pure lucky, like happened in this case, right? But over a period of time, I think people started understanding, at least the authorities started understanding, that we didn't have any other motive apart from really trying to prevent an infection from happening. And I used to really flog that. Because if you started talking about rights and those kind of things at that level, I knew it wouldn't work. They would resist. And they had the power to resist. Whereas this is something they all felt was, oh, it's a good thing to do. Right? So I think you have to keep maneuvering your strategies according to who you are working with. I think the one positive thing that happened was because of the kind of media response we got post the judgment. This was an issue that was discussed in every living room in this country, I think. And therefore, the biggest gain was no more could we sweep this under the carpet. We couldn't say, oh, it's a Western phenomenon, it doesn't exist in our culture, it's not an Indian thing. I think that's the biggest benefit we got, right? But the challenges continue. We're sitting in the Supreme Court. We still haven't heard the end of it, right? So we're still sitting with our fingers crossed because we don't know what the judgment will be. Personally, at a very personal level, when I read that judgment, it's one of the better written judgments in the last decade, I think. The way it is written and the fact that it talks about the Constitution itself, I'm not sure that the Supreme Court could really go back on that. What I'm worried about is, can they block a future path towards ensuring rights for people from the community? See, that to me, that is the fright. I'm just thinking, I could be way off the mark, but it's something I obsess a little bit about. Because now I feel, if we don't push forward this whole fight for rights, life is going to be pretty pointless. Because to me it is ridiculous that we live in a supposed democracy and so many millions of people cannot exercise the rights that are enshrined in the Constitution. I don't get it. I think the most important thing is to get comfortable with yourself first. Without that, it's not happening. The second thing is, I think you have to learn to be shameless. And the reason I say it is, this was straight out of the mouth of babes. I was doing a workshop many years ago in Kamatipura with young boys who work in hotels around the red light area in Kamatipura. And I remember I did a session on sexuality with them, and I was talking about safer sexual practices and therefore masturbation, and I used a very Sanskritized term for masturbation, which is hastamatham, and there was this blank silence, and these kids, and they were 14 and 13 and 12, and they just looked at me, and I was like, how is it possible at this age? What is happening here? So I said hastamatham, then I realized they did not understand what hastamatham was. So I actually emulated masturbation. And then there was this dead silence, and then it was like a floodgate opened, right? There were all these questions and answers and this and that. And the session, which should have lasted about 45 minutes, we went on for 3 hours. And as I was going, I was saying my goodbyes, and I said, so how did you all like talking about these issues today? And there was this young boy, and he says, आप बुरा नहीं मानोगे ना दीदी, जब आपने पहले बात किया, मुझे लगा कि ये कैसे दीदी हैं, गंदी गंदी बातें कर रही हैं. फिर मुझे लगा, जब ये इतनी बेशर्म है तो मैं शर्म क्यों करूं? So I think that whole thing of losing or becoming besharam becomes very important when you're working on sexuality. Third strategy that's really worked for me is whenever you get the opportunity to talk about these issues, but don't be confrontational. And because it's very easy to get angry and lose your cool. Then you've lost the person. So can we find ways to talk to people where all that we want is, let's start by making them look at the issue with a different filter, that's all. So if I've accomplished the fact that someone in front of me says, oh, maybe there's another way of looking at the same issue, if I can get that person to even reach that point, I think the process of change for that individual has started. So, chanda gaad ke ladna sometimes does not work. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And especially an issue like this, which is so fraught and has such moral overtones, we have to not lose people. We have to get them to start thinking like the way we do. You need that in to talk about the diseases, why they let you in. But you respond to questions, and young people will always have questions on sexuality. We go in to talk about HIV, but we end up only talking about sexuality. So it's very, I use that all the time, because I'll say, I wasn't saying anything, but the question came from the kids, right? That's one. Secondly, I think in my experience, when I have worked through PTAs, it's worked. And I actually do the same training that I would do with the kids. I do the same thing with the parents. And invariably, I think 9.5 or 10 times, we've had parents say, I wish we had this information when we were growing. So then obviously I leapfrog on that, right? And I'm like, okay, so do you think your kids should have this information? And they'll say, yes, they should, right? So it's how you convince people. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the fear most people have, that if we talk openly about sex, people are going to get promiscuous. Whereas we know it's exactly the opposite, right? So it's how you present that becomes important. And again, I'm seen as a terribly confrontational person. If you ask most of my friends, they think I'm the worst thing this side of the equator. I fight with the whole world and it's dog. But the fact of the matter is, I pick my battles. I choose those battles. And there's no point in taking on people who are going to think differently, because you're not going to change them overnight. But you use that opportunity to start a process of change. Don't lose that opportunity is what I've always felt very strongly about. I think I don't think we've even started down that path. where is the question of any kind of rights for the LGBT community? I think we have a long battle ahead of us. I don't think that battle has even started. We are having our elections next year. Is this issue on the manifesto of any political party? Even the really so-called progressive left parties? It's not an issue. I think NAS has responded to issues and therefore grown very organically. We've never had a huge strategy in place for anything, which is the wrong thing to say, I suppose. But that is the truth. So I'm not a particularly maternal woman. I never wanted children of my own, and it was a choice I made. I just didn't want children. And when a child was left at our doorstep, and I could not place this child anywhere, that's when we decided to start the care home. And it started not because I felt overly maternal, but it started because I felt it was the right of that child to get a loving, caring, safe environment. And that's why we started the care. It's not easy working with children. For one, it's a lifelong commitment. I can't walk away. If I want to change and I feel I need to move on, not happening for me. And it's not happening because, fortunately or unfortunately, I am the permanent person in their lives. But there are many challenges. One is the Juvenile Justice Act, big challenge. The other is expectation of people around you and the children themselves. Very difficult to deal. As they grow older, how does one manage? This is the only home they know. The legal requirement is after 18 they have to move out. Where do they go? So it's not an easy area to work in. We've had visits from CWC saying, with the most bizarre responses. Once someone from CWC came and said, "Oh, you have such a nice home for these kids. Why don't you put ACs in the dormitories?" I'm like, unfortunately I wasn't there, but I wanted to ask them, would they pay for the electricity? Because we don't get a penny from any government agency. So what are they talking about? Then of course there is a whole set of folks who believe that running an institutional home is not a good thing to do. That what I'm doing is wrong. So I've been challenged on that by agencies like UNICEF. So, but I do believe that you have to have a home, an institutional care home, is part of a continuum in the response to take care of children. Because of course it's ideal that communities respond. But you and I know that tomorrow if my neighbor dies, will I take on their children for life? And here we are asking people to take on a child who has a disorder, like a disability, right? In terms of who will need care. I don't see that happening in most communities. There are children who have absolutely no one, no parents, no extended family support. Where do they go? Ideally, the government should respond. It's the government's job to respond. But if you've ever been to a government home, you'll realize it's the worst punishment that can be doled out to a child. But I am now, over the years, because it's been 13 years since we started the care home. Over the years, I'm beginning to feel that what is important is we need to get the government systems to respond. Because this is not viable long term. it's been a lifelong dream of mine to work with animals. Um, I think if anything defines me at a personal level, it's my love for animals, all animals. And so last year I actually set up All Creatures Great and Small. And we have a little sanctuary where we take care of abandoned dogs, abandoned pets, hit and run cases, paralyzed animals. We also have a 3-legged cow, that was saved from slaughter, a little baby. A bull, I just got a bull a few days ago whose hoof was run over and he doesn't have a hoof. And he came to us, you could see his bone. We got a couple of goats that were rescued and emus and donkeys. So yeah, but so one part again, I think this is again my NAS way of functioning that seems to have gotten replicated here. Because I have the sanctuary and now I'm really wanting to start working on animal welfare issues, where the shelter will feed into the advocacy part. Because I think there's so much work to be done in that area. It's unbelievable. Because no one treats animals as badly as we do as a culture. And you know, Gandhiji actually had said, you can, and therefore it reflects also on the way we look at HIV and the disease itself, is that you know, you can judge a country or a culture by the way it treats its animals. We fall short terribly. And I think it's reflected in every aspect of our lives. Whether it's the environment, whether it's how we treat people, how we've internalized hate and discrimination. It's all there. And therefore, the way we treat animals is so reflective of all of that. Of course, it's an incredible honor. There's no doubt about it. And I think it naturally feels extremely good to be appreciated. One gets so used to brickbats that an appreciation once in a while gives you a lot of courage to continue doing what you're doing. But it always surprises me because somehow it feels like you haven't done anything that great because you're just doing what you think is right and it's your life, right? So it comes as a surprise that someone's actually noticed it. But yes, over the years I have had other, there has been recognition in the Commonwealth Award we got for this kind of, for our work. Then there's this Swami Sachidanand award that. So there are many different awards that one has got. And it always, I think with every award, the recognition means a lot because you suddenly realize that yes, there is value in what you're doing also.